So let's talk about presentations now. And I'm sort of vaguely aware of the irony of me giving a presentation, talking about how to give good presentations, right? And I'm going to start with the same thing I said at the start of the poster talk, right? Know your audience. Okay, so it's the exact same thing. I would give a very different presentation if I was giving my talks to students versus people in the department versus neuroscientists with a heavy background of cellular neuroscience. Okay, you've got to pitch your talk to the audience. And along with that, don't try to constantly overload your audience with the fanciest words that you know, the fanciest graphs that you know, right? You're not going to impress your audience by trying to show off how smart you are. Because if they don't understand what you're talking about, they're not going to think you're smart. They're going to think that you don't know what you're doing, right? I mean, look, there's a couple of people who might think you're so smart. Look, all those crazy big words they were using. But most people are just going to go, that was a bad talk. That guy needs some help. All right, practice. Right now, I kind of I think that most people know that they should practice a talk. I think that most people do practice their talks, but I think that most people should practice their talks more. The the pressure that is on you when you're giving a talk can get to you so that even things that you think are obvious, words that you say every day, they can escape you without practice. So by practicing and practicing and practicing, you do two things together, right? You drill that information into your head and you get yourself comfortable to giving speeches, right? So those are two independent things, right? And once you've been a professor for 50 years, you probably don't need that latter one about getting just used to giving presentations. But when you're earlier on in your career, you do. And as I say, don't just read your slides. Don't just sit, especially if you're prone to nerves or if it's your first time giving a big talk, don't just sit in the corner practicing in front of the screen, right, mumbling to yourself. You got to get out of your seat, you got to stand up, and you've got to talk. Now, this sort of goes back to about don't try and wow people with how clever you are, right? Big words don't impress anybody. They annoy people. All right. So keep it simple. You only want to introduce a couple of jargon words, a couple of words that you think these people have never heard this word before. Because if you're sitting there using these words that they don't know, they're going to be that your audience will be sitting there going, hang on, what was that thing? While you're talking, and they're going to miss a whole slide because they were trying to remember what trans EQTLs are, which I still can't remember what they are. And the people who are working in the right area will know what I'm talking about, right? I hate that paper. There's a paper that, and I know I'm talking about a paper now, but there's one of the groups was given a paper for their bibliography or annotated bibliography, and it was just so full of jargon. And I've read it like 3 times, and I still don't really understand what it's talking about in exact detail, at least. So keep it simple. Just say what you mean and mean what you say. If a simple word will do, just use the simple word. Okay, so engage the audience. Now, this is pretty hard to do in this kind of format, right? But I gave a in-person lecture the other day for the first time in a year, right? And I worked with the audience. I got them to make suggestions, right? I got people to put up their hands. You need to engage with people so that they don't feel like they're just being spoken to. They feel like they've been spoken with. Um, and so, if this was an in-person one, I would say, who here has fallen asleep during a lecture? Now, I didn't used to do that, but now if there's a 8 a.m., 9 a.m. lecture that I go to, I struggle. I really struggle to stay awake. Now, that question is both a demonstration of what happens when you don't engage the audience. They can fall asleep. But that's an example of engagement, right? Just simply asking the audience a question, sincerely. I'm not saying they have to put up their hands, but, you say, all right, everybody, what I want you to do is think about the last time you fell asleep in a lecture, right? That's a very simple form of engagement. But you can, yeah, as I say, be a little hesitant, right? if you're at a conference, sometimes people will say, can everybody stand up and say hello to the, and then the person standing to the right of them or whatever, and everybody groans, right? No, nobody really likes that. It can work though; it really can work. But you got, I wouldn't do it. But yeah, you get them to think. You can get them to raise their hands, right? You can get them to look up a web page on their phone. Little cautious for that one, but right. But getting them out of that mode where they're just sitting there being passive, just words washing over them, getting them out of that is a good idea. So my mum is a child's author, and she, for my whole, well, certainly for up until I finished my PhD, was always going on that I should make my scientific writing more like a story, and I was always like, Mum, come on, this isn't children's books here. We're talking about science, But she was right, okay, that if you can use the skills that you see in in storytelling, use those tricks that are in storytelling, you can also engage your audience. So stories have a beginning, middle, and an ending, a denouement, some conclusion, right? They can have an antagonist. There's something that is blocking you. There is some evil thing. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about, evil Lord Amyloid. I mean that if you can phrase it instead of like, I had name, I did an experiment, I got a result, I did another experiment, this proves this, right? But you can phrase it in, the storytelling prose of a mystery novel, yeah, that so you get your audience interested in. Now obviously this is way harder to do than it is for me to say, right? But it's definitely something worth thinking about, that when you read a book, what keeps you turning the page, right? And that's what you want in your presentation. You want people to go, okay, I need to know the next thing. As I say, think of yourself as a storyteller, not just a scientist. Okay, we'll get into some controversial areas here. So some people are like, never use animations. Okay, I think you need to be used them thoughtfully, right? Don't. I mean, I think PowerPoint's largely gotten rid of them just being in there by default, but use them cleverly or not at all, right? I'm pretty sure I don't need to tell people these days, don't have like a swirling and expanding title, but like something that I like to do, okay, when I'm actually going through science is like this, all right? So I've got a figure, it's a multi-part figure. Now I've got just this bit that I'm talking about, right? And then now I've got this bit that I'm talking about, and it makes it much easier, right? We can go back and say, look, you can see the thing he's getting bigger, right? And now you see the thing he's getting smaller, and we can use that to draw the attention. Now, if it's been really fancy, you can even gray these out if you want to. Now, just for the reference sake, how I'm doing this is that I literally have a white square. The figure is all there, but I have a white square that disappears, right? And I like using disappear. And so I think this is good. Now, if you were going to use the gray out technique, part of me would say, if you don't want people to look at the previous one, well, don't even have it on the screen. So just skip to a whole new slide. But in this case, I would want the reader to compare between the thing he's getting bigger and the thing he's getting smaller. Um, Obviously, that's the technical term, the thingies, but you get my point, right? We've got some animations in there, but they're there to guide the eye. They're there to get a point across. And that point, just to make it clear, is I want all the audience, right, to look at this figure first, right? Even if this was like an A, B, C, D, E, F figure, everybody's looking at this one, and now everybody's looking at that one, okay? And so it helps me guide the audience through. Fonts, same rule as before. Sans serif fonts in general. You can have your titles maybe a different font. You can have quotes be a different font. But only a couple of fonts. Your main font, stick it to sans serif. It's easier for people to read. Colors. Now, I say right there, this is when like the irony was really hitting me as I was making this. This I say, don't use dark color schemes for in-person talks. Right, it's a dark room. You got a black background. Uh, People start to go to sleep, but don't use bright white either. All right, don't use bright white. It hurts the eye, generally speaking. Okay, so But I will say, if you've got a lot of immunohistochemistry, especially multicolored, really beautiful ones, I do think using a dark background is a good idea, right? And then it's like, boom, look at this GFP image, boom, look at this green and red and blue and yellow, and wow. So it really helps your images pop. But don't do it in general. Um, yeah, so again, use those color scheme pickers. Google, color scheme selector. So here's a relatively nice chill one. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I thought it was all right. Um, this is getting a little bit more aggressive. It kind of hurts my eyes a little bit, but I really like this one, right? So we've got a faint light blue, grey background and a sort of navy blue text. I think that's quite good. It's bright enough that it draws the eye. It doesn't put people to sleep, but it's not, black and white. Um, and this is the most important thing. And this is the most important thing in text and talks and posters. Spoon feed your audience, right? Don't expect them to be able to link, finding one and finding three to make conclusion 9A. All right, you've got to help your audience, right? You've got to get them to where you want them to go, and you've got to hold their hand the whole way through. As I say, your audience is probably full of extremely clever people, but they probably aren't feeling very clever right now. They're probably tired, they're distracted, they're thinking about other things, right? The person beside them's chewing gum too loudly. So do everything you can to help them get your point. And if the point is important, say it again. And obviously, I don't literally mean repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, but I, use an analogy. You say amyloid beta has strong adhesive properties, which is to say amyloid beta is like glue. Okay, you can use examples, you can use anecdotes, but if this point is a point that they cannot miss, you've got to hammer it home in some different ways. Now, I love this quote. This is a pretty old quote. And the Reverend Freddie Marvel was not the first person to ever give it, but this is my favorite way of telling it. First, I tells him what I'm going to tell him. Second, I tells him it, and then third, I tells him what I told him. All right. So you've got to warm people up to the context of what the information is for. Now, I got to say, in all honesty, this is usually a worse sin that is done in text, right? Where students will just start telling me about this citation and that citation, and this person showed this and this person showed this, and I'm like, I don't. Why am I being told all this information, right? And so, for instance, if I'm you got to imagine, right? Close your eyes, imagine. It's the start of me giving a talk. It's a research talk, and I come out and I say, rollover incidents were the number one cause of death in certified forklift drivers. Okay, pretty reasonable sentence. Now, what are you paying attention to? Are you paying attention to forklift drivers? Are you paying attention to certified forklift drivers? Are you paying attention to rollovers? Right now, if I come out and I say we are doing research on the process by which, no, let's say um, I am going to tell you about a process for improving the certification for forklift drivers. And this is critical because currently rollovers, a preventable incident, is the number one cause of death in certified forklift drivers, right? So now you start to see, all right, the reason he's telling me this information is because forklift drivers are still dying even though they're certified. However, if I come out and I say, today I'm going to present to you a new process for making tubular steel 10 times stronger than is currently available. This has application because tubular steel is used for making rollover protection, and rollover deaths are the most common cause of death for forklift drivers. Okay, now you're like, okay, we care because despite the fact that you put rollover protection in all heavy equipment, people still die from rollover accidents. Okay, so and I appreciate this is a very shortened version, but people do, you know, provide statistic research findings 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 deep without telling anybody why they're why they're what the context of this information is, and it just makes it very difficult for it to stick in somebody's head. But when you know where they're going, then the relevant bits of the information, they stand out. All right, so you tell people what you're going to tell them, then you tell them it, and then third, you tell them what you told them. Now you don't need to go crazy, right? This I've seen people literally slavishly be like, first I'm going to tell you this, then I'm going to tell you this, then I'm going to tell you this. Okay, here's the first one. That's ridiculous, but you've got to give people the context for the information before you give it to them.